Welcome to Sweet Dreams Storytelling, where we unwind, relax, and drift into dreamland. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm so glad you're joining me tonight. Let's get cozy and settle in. Story for this evening is our adaptation of a beautiful novel by E.N. Nesbit, The Book of Dragons. Chapter 1. The Library. Below the Library. Most stories begin with once upon a time, but this one begins on a Tuesday. That particular Tuesday had no dragons, at least not at breakfast, and the most unusual thing about it was that Edward had found a dead spider inside his toast. But that, he supposed, could happen to anyone. What was unusual happened just before tea. Edward and his sister Lucy lived in the palace, not because they were royal, though Lucy claimed she had the air of a duchess, but because their father was the chief librarian of the royal archives, a position almost nobody else wanted, as the books had a habit of falling on people's heads or whispering at night. The royal archives were enormous. They wound downwards beneath the palace in ancient spirals of stone staircases, each level colder and older than the one above it. Most people didn't know how far they went. Edward did, at least he thought he did, until the day he found the door. It happened because of a mouse, or, to be precise, Lucy chasing a mouse with a feather duster and a war cry that sounded like spoons. She always did things like that. The mouse, wisely, vanished through a gap in the bookcase. But something behind the bookcase caught Edward's eye, not a mouse hole but the glimmer of old hinges, crusted with rust and time. "Lucy," he said slowly, "bring me the torch." "Bring your own torch," she said, still winded from battle, but she brought it anyway. They pushed aside the case with a creak and a groan, and found a door, a real one, heavy, iron-bound, arched like a cathedral window, with symbols carved in a language neither of them recognized. "It's locked," Edward said, pressing the handle. "Did you try knocking?" said Lucy. He rolled his eyes, but knocked anyway. Nothing happened. Then Lucy knocked, and the door clicked. "Obviously it liked me better," she said. The air that greeted them was dry, dusty, and cold, like the breath of a forgotten tomb. But it smelled of books. Not just any books, important books, the kind of books that changed things, that whispered to you when you weren't listening. That might bite. They stepped inside. The room was vast, circular, with walls made of stone and shadows. Books were stacked in towering piles that reached the ceiling, not shelved at all, as if even the shelves had given up. In the center was a pedestal. On the pedestal lay a book. Not just any book. It was bound in dark leather, worn soft with age, with corners trimmed in gold, and a lock that had no keyhole. It pulsed faintly with a reddish glow, like a heart beneath skin. The cover read, in letters so old they seemed etched by fire, "The Book of Dragons." Lucy stepped forward. "Do you think it's safe?" "No," said Edward, which is exactly why he reached out and touched it. The book shivered beneath his fingers. Then the lock gave a soft sigh, as though deciding it had been closed long enough, and clicked open. The book flew open. Pages whipped by in a flurry of parchment and wind, though there was no breeze. Strange symbols flickered, rearranged themselves, became English. Then it spoke. Not with a voice exactly, but a whisper in Edward's bones. "This is not a history. This is a warning." Lucy, whose hair was now standing on end in a most dramatic fashion, asked, "Did you hear that?" "I think it spoke to me," Edward whispered. The pages settled on a story. A title bloomed in ink. "The Book of Beasts." Beneath it, a picture of a lion with wings, a dragon's tail and ruby eyes that sparkled. And then the picture moved. The lion stretched, yawned, and then ever so slowly turned its head to look at them. "Oh," said Lucy. "Close it," said Edward. But the book had other ideas. The lion stepped out of the page. It grew as it walked, from drawing to shadow to beast, until it stood full and terrible in the center of the room, its breath hot with the scent of burning cinnamon and ancient smoke. The children backed away. Edward tried to speak. Lucy tried to reach the door. But the lion merely looked at them with tired eyes and said, in a voice like thunder, "Where is the king?" And then it vanished. As suddenly as it had come, it leapt right back into the page. The book slammed shut with a thump that shook the pedestal. Silence. Edward looked at Lucy. Lucy looked at Edward. "I think," she said, "that we just let something out." "I think," Edward said, We just let everything out." Then they both turned as the door behind them slowly creaked, closed. Chapter 2. The Book of Beasts. Edward had read many books where the hero falls asleep after a harrowing discovery and wakes to find it was all a dream. This was not one of those stories, because he hadn't slept, not even a little. After the lion vanished into the book and the door creaked ominously shut behind them, Edward and Lucy spent what felt like hours banging on it, shouting, whispering, offering biscuits, which Lucy claimed always worked with dogs, and even reciting poems. None of it helped. The book sat silently on the pedestal, as if it had never moved at all. At last, the door reopened, not with creaking but a dignified swoosh, and standing there was their father. He looked very unimpressed. "Children," he said, "why are you in the forbidden sub-archives?" "We didn't mean to," Lucy began, which was technically true. "We were sorting books," Edward added, which was technically not. Their father sipped spectacles slid slightly down his nose. "Did you open anything?" There was a silence. "I might have touched something," Edward admitted. Their father sighed as only chief librarians can sigh, like 1,000 dusty pages turning all at once. A surprise appointment. The next morning, Edward was summoned to the royal throne room. "You stir not in trouble," Lucy whispered to him. "You stir in plot development." The throne room was very shiny and unnecessarily enormous, with long red carpets, guards with extremely serious eyebrows, and a king's throne at the far end, but the king wasn't in it. Instead, a council of robed figures stood murmuring among themselves. At the center was the High Chancellor, who looked like a broom that had been taught Latin. "Edward Bartholomew Periwinkle," he intoned. "By ancient law, the child who awakens the Book of Beasts shall be named temporary sovereign of the realm until the creatures released are returned or neutralized." Edward blinked. "The Zips want what?" "King," said Lucy, delighted. But I don't even like velvet," he spluttered, as a very eager squire attempted to put a crown on his head. "Regardless," the Chancellor went on, "you are responsible for the beast you unleashed. The Book of Beasts must not be opened again until the threat is neutralized. Do you accept this charge?" Edward, who was now wearing velvet, boots, and a distinctly itchy sash, muttered, "Do I have a choice?" "No," said everyone. The garden incident. The garden behind the palace had once been peaceful. That was before a winged lion with ruby eyes had been accidentally let out of a magic book. Edward had a plan. It wasn't a good plan or a long one, but it involved borrowing a telescope, one of Lucy's snacks, cheese rolls, and a very old book about heraldic monsters. Lucy naturally invited herself along. They spotted it near the lily pond, sleeping beneath a rose tree, looking far too majestic for something that had crawled out of a page. "What if it eats people?" Edward whispered. "It hasn't eaten us," Lucy whispered back. "Maybe it steps vegetarian." Just then, the lion stood, stretched, and looked straight at them. "I think it's sex coming this way," said Lucy. "I think I'm going that way," said Edward, running in the opposite direction. But the lion didn't pounce. It walked with the patient dignity of a teacher who'd seen everything before. "Where is the king?" it asked again. Edward took a deep breath. "I am, temporarily." The lion tilted its head. "Then I shall not eat you." "Thanks," he said weakly. "I require a hunt," it declared. "We don't yet have any deer," Edward said quickly, "or antelope, or goblins." "No," said the lion. "I shall hunt something more thrilling. I shall hunt books." And before anyone could stop it, the lion leapt through the castle window, glass and curtains flying. The book hunt. In the hours that followed, reports poured in from across the palace. The lion had been seen in the map room, tearing up atlases. It had been spotted in the poetry section, roaring indignantly at romantic verse. It had briefly become stuck in the archives of tax law, but escaped by smashing through a wall. "Why does it want books?" Lucy asked, as they trailed behind the wreckage. "I think it sits looking for something," Edward muttered. "It asked for a king. Maybe it needs orders." "So give it an order," she said. "You do it," he said. "I'm not the temporary monarch. You serve the bossy one." Before the argument could escalate, they heard the lion's voice from the grand reading hall. "Where is the dragon?" Lucy and Edward arrived just in time to see the lion clawing at a globe and flinging scrolls across the room. Edward climbed up on a desk and said, As bravely as he could, "There is no dragon, not unless you bring one out of the book again." The lion turned, its ruby eyes narrowed. "Then open it." A difficult decision. Back in the sub-archives, the Book of Dragons waited. Edward stood in front of it, the lion beside him, Lucy holding a broom in case things got lively. "If I open it again," Edward said, "another beast might escape." "Or the same one," said Lucy. "They might take turns." "I have a feeling," Edward murmured, "that it won't be the same." The book pulsed once, then twice. Edward touched the cover. It opened without complaint. The page turned on its own. A new story formed. The Crimson Cockatrice. A picture of a terrible creature, part rooster, part dragon, part something unspeakably ancient, shimmered into view. The lion crouched, growling. Lucy backed up 3 steps, and the page rippled. Feathers burst from the book. Smoke hissed through the room. There was a screech like metal being grated over stone. And then, silence. The room was empty. But far in the distance, from somewhere deep in the city, came the unmistakable echo of a cock's crow. Only this one could melt stone. Edward closed the book very slowly. "I think," said Lucy, "you start going to need more than a cheese roll this time." Chapter 3. The Ice Dragon. 3 days had passed since the incident with the cockatrice, which had, despite Edward's best efforts, not been contained by cheese rolls, broomsticks, or royal decrees. The creature had taken up residence on the palace roof, frozen 5 gargoyles, and laid a mysterious egg in the East Tower. Edward, still technically king, temporary, was not enjoying his reign. "I thought kings had banquets and treasure," he grumbled, holding a map that was slowly icing over. "Not poultry problems." "Ice poultry," Lucy corrected, "and technically it excepts a cockatrice, which isn't set even supposed to lay eggs. Maybe this one's a feminist." The Chancellor had not found that remark amusing. A visitor from the north. The palace was in disarray when the visitor arrived. She came not on horseback but by sleigh, drawn by 6 white reindeer with silver antlers that rang like wind chimes. Her cloak was made of snowflakes. Her eyes were the color of frozen glass. Her name was Lady Ingrid of the North, and she smelled faintly of peppermint and moonlight. She bowed to Edward. "Your Majesty, the ice dragon has awakened." Edward exchanged a glance with Lucy. "Is that like an ice cream problem, or more of a global catastrophe problem?" Lady Ingrid raised one silver eyebrow. "My kingdom is vanishing. 1 village a night, frozen, silenced, erased." "And you think it's our fault?" Lucy asked. "I think the Book of Dragons has begun again," Ingrid replied, "and I think the next chapter belongs to me." She held out a scroll, on it an illustration of a dragon with wings like glacier shards and breath like a blizzard. At the bottom, written in curling ink, Chapter 3, The Ice Dragon. Edward sighed. "I was afraid of that. Journey to the frozen north." That night, they rode north with Ingrid in her sleigh, bundled in coats, mittens, and an alarming number of scarves. The stars above them glinted like frost on glass, and the wind howled secrets into their ears. They passed forests silent with snow, rivers frozen in mid-ripple, and hills that glowed faintly blue under the moon. Ingrid spoke little. Only once did she turn to Edward and say, "Not all dragons want to burn the world, some only wish to forget it." The first frozen village. At dawn, they arrived in the village of Brindlefen, or what was left of it. Every house, every tree, every person was locked in a perfect sheet of ice. Children frozen mid-laugh, dogs paused in mid-bark, even snowflakes suspended in the air. Lucy touched a window and recoiled. "It sits cold," she gasped. "Not just outside cold, lonely cold." Ingrid nodded grimly. "The ice dragon doesn't just freeze flesh, it freezes time, memory, the very story of a place." Edward looked up. High above, on the peak of the mountain, stood a shape, huge, gleaming, coiled like a serpent of glacier glass. The dragon. Into the mountain. They began to climb. Ingrid led, Edward shivered, and Lucy poked things with a stick just in case they were magical. The wind thickened as they rose. Snow turned to sleet. The sky dimmed to twilight even though it was noon. The entrance to the dragon's lair was a cave carved in spirals of ice. Inside, the walls shimmered with frozen reflections of people they did not recognize, faces trapped in the crystal, forever watching. and then they saw it. The ice dragon. It was beautiful. Horrible, yes, but beautiful. Long and sleek as a river, with wings like cathedral windows and a mane of frost that sparkled with stars. Its eyes were closed, but it breathed slowly, filling the cavern with mist. Edward stepped forward. The dragon opened one eye and spoke not aloud, but into his mind. "You opened the book." "Yes," Edward whispered. "Then you are the scribe, and I am your memory." Edward frowned. "What does that mean?" The dragon-sip's voice echoed. "The book remembers, and so do I. Before fire, before man, there was silence and ice. I have come to restore it." The argument with a dragon. "You can sit just freeze everything," Lucy shouted. "That sits not restoring, it sits erasing." "Erasure is mercy," the dragon replied. "In silence, there is no war, no pain, no mistakes." "But there sits nothing," Edward said. "No stories, no life." The dragon turned its full gaze on him. "Is that not what you wanted? You opened the book. You wanted power." "No," Edward said softly. "I wanted to understand, but I didn't know it would start rewriting the world." "Then close it," the dragon whispered. "Undo the chapter. Let me sleep." Edward hesitated. Lucy reached for his hand. Ingrid said quietly, "Sometimes kings must make the choice between remembering and forgetting. Choose." Ending the chapter, Edward took out the Book of Dragons. The wind surged. The dragon growled. He opened it. The pages fluttered, resisted, cried out in gusts of snow, but Edward found the chapter and read aloud. "Let this tale end, for stories belong to time, not timelessness. Let the ice melt where it has overreached. Let the dragon sleep again, and dream not of erasure, but of wonder." The dragon sighed. A great wind blew. The cave began to melt, from the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. The faces in the ice faded peacefully. The dragon curled in on itself, smaller and smaller, until it was no more than a snowflake. Then, gone. Back to the palace. When they returned to Brindlefen, the villagers were awake. The snow was soft again. The sky was blue. Ingrid bowed deeply to Edward. "You saved more than my kingdom," she said. "You saved its memory." Edward smiled, but he was tired. Very tired. Back at the palace, the Book of Dragons glowed faintly on its pedestal. The page for the ice dragon was blank now, except for a single word. "Remember." Lucy looked at Edward and said, "I think we're going to need warmer socks." Chapter 4. The Island of the 9 Whirlpools. Edward awoke to the smell of burnt toast and the sound of Lucy loudly accusing the palace cook of deliberately incinerating the bread into charcoal. It had been 4 days since the ice dragon had been put back to sleep. Edward hoped, rather pathetically, that the Book of Dragons had decided to take a little nap as well, but books, especially magical ones, seldom do what you want. That morning it summoned him, not with a trumpet or glowing lights, but by rearranging the books on his shelf into a very clear message. "Come downstairs, now, BOD." Edward sighed and put on his boots. A new page. In the archives below the palace, the Book of Dragons sat on its pedestal like an old cat who'd knocked over too many teacups to be trusted. Edward approached wearily, Lucy close behind. "Do you think it's Sessions lonely?" she asked. "I think it's sick scheming," he muttered. The book opened itself. A new page shimmered into view, words dripping onto the parchment like morning dew. Chapter 4. The Island of the 9 Whirlpools. In a sea where no maps hold sway, there lies an island wrapped in 9 ever-turning whirlpools. There, a lost princess waits in a castle of coral and tide, held in a time-looped dream by a dragon who turns riddles into chains. A drawing formed on the page, a jagged island in a spiral sea, a castle in the shape of a seashell, and 9 whirlpools spinning around it like sentries. Edward rubbed his temples. Time-looped dreams, riddle chains. Can we fight a normal dragon for once? "No," said Lucy cheerfully, "but I did pack waterproof socks." The voyage. They departed at once, accompanied by Admiral Thistlewick, a pirate-turned-navy man who smelled of oranges and old maps, and claimed to have seen the island that isn't there once, while upside down in a barrel of brandy. The royal ship, the persistent shrubbery, sailed into the unknown sea that wasn't on any map. For 3 days, they saw nothing. On the 4th, the water began to swirl. And on the 5th, they found it. Or rather, it found them. The 9 whirlpools. The island loomed out of the fog, its shores jagged and shifting, constantly reshaped by crashing water. Around it, 9 vast whirlpools spun in symmetrical fury, each pulling and pushing the tides like gears in a monstrous clock. "Each whirlpool guards a path," said Admiral Thistlewick. "Choose the wrong one, and you spinned around for eternity." "How do we choose the right one?" Edward asked. As if in answer, a voice rose from the sea, watery, musical, almost mocking. "To find the way where answers sleep, first answer riddles from the deep. For every pool a secret hides, but only truth shall part the tides." Lucy clapped her hands. "Ooh, riddles. Finally something I sit and good at." Riddles of the sea. A glowing jellyfish rose from the water and floated before them, pulsing with soft light. "I have no mouth, but I roar and sing. I wear no crown, yet rule as king. I crush the stone, I dance with foam. What am I?" Edward opened his mouth, then closed it. Lucy was quicker. "The sea," she declared. The first whirlpool slowed. The second riddle came in a whispering tide. "I turn to glass when touched by flame, yet flow like cloth without a name. I bend the sky, I hide the stars. What am I?" "Sand," Edward guessed. Lucy shook her head. "No water again, but ice. It turns to glass, it flows when melted." "Correct." A second whirlpool ceased its spin. They solved 7 in total. One involved moonlight, another involved salt. One was a trick question, nothing was the answer, which Lucy insisted she'd gotten right on purpose. At the 8th whirlpool, the jellyfish pulsed a final time. Asterisk, asterisk. The last and deepest answer waits. But ask yourself, what holds the gates? When stories end and time is gone, who chooses what the tale lives on? Shink. Edward hesitated. "The reader," he said. "No," Lucy said softly. "The writer." The jellyfish turned silver. The 8th whirlpool stopped. But the 9th, it spun faster. A massive shape broke the waves. The dragon appears. From the center whirlpool, a sea dragon rose, serpentine, scaled with coral and pearl, its eyes glowing with shifting tides. It spoke in a language of bubbles and storms, but the book translated in Edward's mind. "You dare unravel my riddles, but do you know the final truth?" Edward stood his ground. "You sit the guardian of the island, but you don't want to keep it locked. You want someone to solve your puzzle." "Why?" "Because you sit trapped too," Lucy said. "Just like the princess, you sit been guarding the dream so long, you forgot it wasn't sit yours." The dragon paused. Then it said, "Then wake us." The princess in the dream. The water calmed. The whirlpools ceased. Their ship sailed into the island's heart, through a crystal gate, up a path of singing shells, to a castle that shimmered like sunlight on tide pools. Inside, they found her, a young princess asleep on a bed of seagrass, her hair flowing like seaweed in a current only she could feel. Lucy reached out. The moment her hand touched the princess's, the castle rippled. The tide stopped, the dragon sighed, and the princess opened her eyes. "Have I been dreaming?" she asked. Edward smiled. "Yes, but it's Sit's time for the next chapter." Home again. They returned to the palace with the princess, the sea dragon gone, the whirlpools now quiet. The book of dragons sat waiting, its pages warm. Edward opened it. The chapter had already rewritten itself. The island of the 9 whirlpools resolved. Sometimes the fiercest dragons are riddles, and sometimes the only chains are the ones we choose to keep. At the bottom of the page, a new line appeared. Chapter 5, Hunting the Invisible Dragon. Lucy groaned. "How do you hunt something you can see?" Edward grimaced, hopefully not with cheese rolls. Chapter 5, Hunting the Invisible Dragon. In the days following their return from the island of the 9 whirlpools, Edward hoped the Book of Dragons would remain politely shut. It did not. It waited exactly 1 day and 7 hours. Then it began to hum. At first softly, like a kettle thinking about boiling, then louder, then it started vibrating gently on its pedestal, spinning open to a blank page that rapidly inked itself with urgent purpose. Chapter 5. Hunting the Invisible Dragon. The dragon you seek cannot be seen, cannot be touched, and cannot be caught, unless you learn to look at the world sideways. Great, said Edward, who was in the middle of a sandwich, a metaphysical dragon. Lucy peered over his shoulder. It says it's sex-attacking Wickmere Hollow. Edward blinked. That sips where Miss Thistle teaches etiquette classes. Lucy smiled. So it sets already a danger to civility. Wickmere Hollow. Wickmere Hollow was the kind of village that prided itself on being uninteresting. No bandits, no trolls, no scandal. Its most exciting event in the last decade had been the mayor's hat blowing off and landing on a cow. But now people were vanishing. Not in a dramatic, villainous puff of smoke, just slowly, quietly, and strangely. First a gardener, then a schoolteacher, then the mayor himself. Something's wrong, said Miss Thistle, the famously precise etiquette instructor who now greeted them wearing an armored tea cozy. It sets like the air gets heavy, she said, and people forget who they are. Lucy frowned. That sip's not a dragon. That sip's a spell. Edward wasn't set so sure. He opened the book. It showed a page completely blank until frost crept across it in delicate lines, and there, barely visible in the pale outline, was the shape of wings, the unseen one. It does not roar, but it devours. It does not burn, but it withers. You cannot see it, but it sees you. Charming, Edward muttered. The empty town. They began investigating. Lucy questioned the townsfolk. Edward wandered through the square. Everywhere they went, people paused, eyes unfocused, smiles faded. When Edward spoke to a baker, the man looked at him blankly and said, "I'm not here, I don't exist," and walked away. That evening, the fog rolled in. It wasn't real fog, not cold or damp. It made no sound, but it pressed. Lucy clutched his arm. "Edward, do you feel that?" "I feel watched," he whispered. A clue in the quiet. That night, they stayed in the village inn, or tried to. Edward dreamed of spinning wheels, blank pages, and shadows that tiptoed across his thoughts. He awoke to scratching. Lucy was already awake, scribbling in a notebook. "Look at this," she whispered. "I think it sets attacking people who stop believing." "Believing in what?" Edward asked. "In themselves, in the world, in magic." He blinked. "The dragon feeds on doubt." "Exactly, and that sips why it sips invisible. Because when you doubt yourself, you stop seeing the wonder." "That's unusually deep for before breakfast," Edward muttered, but he understood. The dragon wasn't sipped just unseen. It was unknowing. The invisible attack. Outside, the fog thickened, screams echoed, soft ones, muffled like distant dreams. They ran into the square and saw a girl crouching, eyes shut, whispering, "I don't it matter, I don't it matter." Edward knelt beside her. "You do matter. You sit here. What sips your name?" She didn't respond. Lucy raised her voice. "You sit at Ada Green, and you bake strawberry scones that scare the pigeons, and you once yelled at a goose for being rude." The girl blinked. The air shimmered. And suddenly, something shrieked. They couldn't see it, but they felt it. Wind roared past. The cobblestones cracked. Windows shattered. A gust knocked Edward backward, and for just a moment, he saw the dragon. Its shape was enormous. Its wings folded around the rooftops, but it was made of doubt, of forgetfulness. Its eyes were swirling grey. And then, it vanished again. The mirror plan. Lucy had an idea. A brilliant, borderline reckless idea. "We don't need to see it," she said. "We need to reflect it." They gathered every mirror, polished shield, and soup spoon in Wickmere Hollow. They lined the village square with reflective surfaces, angles that would catch what the human eye couldn't. Edward opened the book. The page for the invisible dragon was now half written, flickering between ink and blank. "I can feel it coming," he said. Lucy handed him a mirror. "Let Sitz show it to itself." The reckoning. When the dragon returned, the air chilled, fog curled around their feet, the ground trembled. They held their mirrors, and in a shimmer, the dragon appeared. It screamed, not in rage but in terror. Its reflection showed not a mighty beast, but a shadow twisted in on itself, made of lies, fears, and forgotten dreams. "Name it," Lucy shouted. Edward stood tall. "You are doubt, and you don't set rule here." The dragon roared. Then it cracked, splintered into smoke, dust, and wind. Gone. The fog lifted. People blinked, shook off the silence, and remembered themselves. A quiet aftermath. That evening, Wickmere Hollow held a thank you feast. There were pies, laughter, and someone wrote a poem about the dragon that didn't rhyme properly, but made everyone cheer anyway. Edward opened the book. The page now read, Chapter 5, Closed. Some dragons are not born in fire, but in fear. And the only way to defeat them is to remember who you are. At the bottom, the next title had already begun to form. Chapter 6, The Fiery Dragon of the Mountain. Edward groaned. "Let me guess, this one does breathe fire." Lucy smirked. "Let's spring marshmallows." Chapter 6, The Fiery Dragon of the Mountain. If Edward had learned anything from his brief career as a temporary monarch and amateur dragon wrangler, it was this: there is no such thing as a quiet week. He had just finished his second slice of blackberry pie when the ground shook. Just once. But enough that Lucy dropped her fork and Edward dropped his entire sense of peace. Then the book began to smoke. "Not again," he muttered, bolting toward the royal archives. A burning message. The Book of Dragons was glowing faintly red on its pedestal, not the warm, cozy glow of a lantern, the dangerous, simmering glow of a kettle about to explode. As they entered the room, it burst open in a whoosh of flame. A new page was writing itself, not in ink this time, but in curling black soot. Chapter 6, The Fiery Dragon of the Mountain. Deep beneath Mount Calidor, where flame sleeps and earth growls, a dragon stirs, not with rage, but with sorrow. Beware the dragon who cannot cool its heart. Lucy frowned. Mount Calidor. Isn't set that the volcano they pretend isn't set the volcano? Correct, said Edward grimly. The one with the happy brochures and the spa that smells faintly of sulfur. Arrival at Mount Calidor. They travelled by royal air carriage, a sort of floating teacup with wings, arriving at the town of Ember Hollow, nestled in the mountain's lower slopes. It was deceptively pleasant. Red-roofed cottages, steaming hot springs, and a suspicious number of cafes named after fire. The mayor, a tall woman with singed eyebrows, met them at the landing pad. "I assure you, everything is perfectly safe," she said, as a distant boom rattled a flower pot off a windowsill. "We prefer to call it a thermal hiccup," she added. Lucy arched an eyebrow. "Has anyone been scorched?" "Well," said the mayor carefully, "the ice cream stand was vaporized, but no people yet." "Progress," muttered Edward. Into the lava tunnels. The townspeople reported strange heat waves, objects bursting into flame, and the sound of weeping echoing through the lava tubes beneath the mountain. "We don't see a dragon," said the mayor, "but we feel it like sadness and sunlight rolled into one." "Let's go meet the volcano ghost," said Lucy, already strapping on a helmet. With torches and protective cloaks, stitched with fireproof beetle silk, they entered the tunnels beneath the mountain, twisting, glowing paths of rock, lined with long-dead magma flows. And then they heard it. A voice. Low, echoing, cracking like dry wood in flame. "I didn't want this." The dragon revealed. They entered a chamber so hot the air rippled. There in the center stood the fiery dragon of the mountain. It was massive, yes, but not terrifying. It was melting. Its wings dripped like wax. Its eyes glowed with sadness, not rage. It turned to them and said, "I was born in warmth, not war, but the world sees fire, and it runs." Edward stepped forward, slowly. "Are you hurting the mountain on purpose?" "No," the dragon whispered, "but I dream, and when I dream, I burn." A crack split the ground beneath them. Lava bubbled up, hissing like fury. Lucy grabbed Edward Sayre's arm. "This isn't set anger, it sets grief." The source of the fire. They discovered a collapsed chamber behind the dragon, a place once full of statues, carved stories and songs in stone. A library of fire, melted by accident in the dragon's earliest dreams. "This was my home," the dragon said. "My story, now gone." Lucy whispered. "It suts not the dragon who suts dangerous, it suts its memory." The Book of Dragons fluttered open. A page filled with fire symbols shimmered. Edward stepped forward. "You don't have to burn alone," he said. "Let us help you remember, not melt it all away." A dragon sips heart. Edward opened the book to a blank page. He wrote, not a command, not a banishment, a story. Once there was a dragon who dreamed too hotly. But someone dreamed beside it and cooled the fire into light. The page glowed. The mountain quieted. The dragon closed its eyes and breathed, not fire but golden smoke that shimmered and danced like autumn leaves. The lava retreated. The earth stopped shaking. Ember Hollow reborn. When they emerged, the town was peaceful. Steam still curled in the air, but not with menace, with warmth. The dragon slept again beneath the mountain, not trapped, not silenced, but understood. The mayor wept into a lukewarm teacup. "Will it ever return?" she asked. Edward nodded. "Only if someone forgets why it ever burned." A new page. Back in the palace, the Book of Dragons pulsed warmly. The chapter had rewritten itself. Chapter 6. Resolved. Not all dragons want to destroy. Some are just waiting for someone to listen. A new title burned faintly on the next page. Chapter 7. The Dragon Who Wanted Stories. Lucy brightened. Finally, a dragon with taste. Edward sighed. Let's sulp, it prefers fiction to fire. Chapter 7. The Dragon Who Wanted Stories. Edward wasn't quite sure what he'd expected a week without a dragon to feel like. Perhaps quieter, safer, a bit more tea and biscuits, and less imminent doom. But when the Book of Dragons didn't hum, glow, whisper, or burst into flames for a full 5 days, he started to worry. "It's too quiet," he said, staring suspiciously at the motionless cover. Lucy, who was busy building a biscuit tower on her plate, didn't look up. Maybe it's set writing a novel of its own, something autobiographical. Then with an audible flutter, the book opened. A single page turned, and this time, instead of dramatic flames or earthquakes, delicate handwriting appeared as if traced by a careful quill. Chapter 7. The Dragon Who Wanted Stories. In a forgotten tower beyond the edge of maps, a dragon waits, not for battle, not for gold, but for a tale worth listening to. Beware, stories can feed or starve. Edward blinked. That doesn't sound too bad. Lucy smiled. Finally, a literary dragon. The Forgotten Tower. The book gave them directions that were more poetic than practical. Where the forest ends in silence. Where the river turns without reason. Where birds never finish their songs. It took a borrowed sky yacht, 3 wrong turns, and 1 deeply suspicious goat path, but eventually they found it. A lone tower stood in a sunlit valley, so tall it tickled the clouds, wrapped in ivy and silence. No guards, no traps, just a carved sign at the door. "Leave swords, bring stories." Lucy whispered, "I like this one already." The dragon in the tower. Inside, the spiral staircase wound higher than reason allowed, and at the top, beneath an open dome of sky, was the dragon. It was old, but not broken, large, but gentle-eyed. Its scales shimmered like ink. Its wings were parchment thin. Around it lay piles and piles of books, some real, some half-faded, some scribbled in chalk on the stone floor. The dragon did not rise when it saw them. Instead, it spoke in a warm, tired voice. "You came, tell me a story." Edward hesitated. "Any story." The dragon blinked slowly. "A true one." "The first story." Lucy stepped forward. "I'll tell you the story of a girl who chased a mouse into a forbidden library and found a book that changed everything." The dragon listened. It did not blink. When she finished, the air shimmered with heat, not flame, but emotion. The dragon exhaled a puff of silver smoke. "Good, but not enough." Edward offered another, the tale of the ice dragon, of frozen time and forgotten names. The dragon sips, tail curled. "Better." The hunger revealed. As the children rested, they noticed something peculiar. The more stories they told, the brighter the tower grew. Its walls glowed faintly with scenes from the tales, moving, shifting murals that told and retold what had been spoken aloud. But when they stopped, the air cooled. The dragon shivered. Edward frowned. "Are you hungry?" The dragon didn't answer directly. It only said, "When the world stopped telling stories, I stopped being seen." Lucy stepped back. "You eat stories." "No, I live in them. Without them, I fade." That's when they noticed it. Parts of the dragon's body, its tail, its claws, were becoming transparent. "The challenge, if we don't tell it a story," Edward whispered, "its stall vanish." "No," Lucy said, understanding dawning. "If we don't tell it a story, it never existed." The Book of Dragons shimmered open again. A blank page appeared, but instead of writing itself, it displayed a single prompt: "Finish the dragon." Edward Sip's voice shook. "We have to write the Dragon Sip's ending, the final tale." Together, they crafted the story. There once was a dragon who never wanted gold or to fight knights. It lived at the edge of the world, where silence grew wild. But it had one treasure: stories. It listened and remembered and became part of them. So it didn't die. It became the keeper of stories, the dragon who made sure no tale was ever forgotten. The dragon smiled, a deep, contented smile. And then, without a roar or flash, it vanished. Not in death. In completion. Keeper of stories, the tower remained. But now, the walls were covered in shifting tales. Yours, mine, theirs. The stories of people who might never be remembered, except someone was listening. Edward looked at Lucy. "I think we didn't fight that dragon." "No," she said. "We fed it." A new chapter. Back in the palace, the Book of Dragons was quiet. Then, with a soft rustle, it opened. Chapter 7 concluded. Some dragons hoard gold. Some hoard silence. But the rarest of all, hoard stories. At the very bottom, in tiny inked letters, a title began to form. Chapter 8, The Sea Serpent. Edward groaned. "Water again?" Lucy grinned. "Better pack the seasick tea." Chapter 8, The Sea Serpent. The day began innocently enough, with a picnic by the ornamental pond, a jam tart contest, which Lucy won by bribing the judges with extra jam, and no visible signs of dragon-related crisis. So of course, the Book of Dragons burst into bubbles. Real ones. Dozens of glittering soap-like orbs spilled from the seams of its cover, floating into the air and smelling faintly of salt and storm. Then it opened. A wave of cold sea mist swept across the archives. Chapter 8, The Sea Serpent. Beneath the ocean's skin lies a serpent older than history, a guardian not of treasure but of a promise. Disturb its charge, and the sea itself will rise. Lucy tilted her head. "This one sounds wet." Edward nodded grimly. "I hate sea travel. Everything sets, damp, even the food is damp. And the pirates are never polite," she added. Port Blackfin. They set out that very evening for Port Blackfin, a rough and rusty seafaring town perched on jagged rocks, where the buildings leaned like tired sailors and everything smelled like old boots and seaweed. The harbor was in chaos. Ships tossed wildly, though there was no wind. Gulls screamed and flew backwards, and every hour the tide rose, then refused to go down. The townsfolk whispered one name: Marek the Bone-Tooth, a notorious privateer. "He stole something," said a harbormaster with a permanently singed mustache, "from the deep, from the place no one goes." Edward frowned. What did he steal? The man shivered. "They say, the serpent sex egg." The serpent sits charge. With the help of a semi-retired pirate named Granny Gull, who carried a sword cane and swore like a grandmotherly thunderstorm, they located Marek's ship, the Devil's Barnacle, adrift and deserted, tangled in seaweed. The deck was slick, the sails torn, the hold was oddly warm. And in the captain's sex cabin, they found it. A pale blue egg, as tall as Edward, faintly glowing, nestled in stolen silk and gold coins. Lucy stared. "That Sip's not treasure, that Sip's bait." The Book of Dragons hummed in his satchel. A wave hit the side of the ship, enormous and slow, like the ocean inhaling. Then they heard it. A sound not made by horn or bell. A low humming cry that came not from the air, but from the water itself. The rising tide. Back in town, the sea had begun to rise unnaturally fast. Salt water flooded the streets, carrying barrels, boots, and one very angry cat. At the far edge of the horizon, a shape was forming, a coil, a ripple, a spine longer than the harbor itself. The sea serpent is waking, Granny Gull whispered. It doesn't frege, it corrects, and we sip, broken the rule. What rule? Edward asked. De Nundes steal what guards de Nundes give. Into the deep. They returned the egg to a small rowboat and began rowing into open waters. The deeper they went, the calmer the sea grew, eerily calm, as if the ocean was watching. And then it surfaced. The sea serpent. It was not monstrous, it was immense, serene. Its body moved like water given shape, scales patterned like maps of forgotten continents. Its eyes were blue whirlpools, ancient and unreadable. It did not roar. It stared. Lucy stood up in the boat and shouted, "We didn't steal it, but we set here to give it back." The serpent circled the boat, once, twice, then it rose. A tower of sea. Edward held out the egg. "We stout sorry," he said. "Truly, we didn't stout know what it meant to you." The sea serpent blinked slowly and spoke, not in words but in thought. "It is not an egg, it is a memory. A promise made long ago, kept in silence. The promise was, do not take, do not name, do not own. You have returned it. So I remember mercy." It took the egg gently in its coils, and with a final gaze, dove into the deep. Calm after the storm, the sea stilled. Tide rolled backward, like an apology. The harbor dried, the gulls righted themselves. Even the angry cat begrudgingly purred. Granny Gull toasted them with seawater grog. "You two are trouble," she said fondly, "but you set honest trouble." A final note. Back in the palace, the Book of Dragons opened quietly. A page filled itself slowly. Chapter 8 concluded. Some dragons do not burn or bite. They keep, and when they are wronged, they do not scream. They simply remember. Below, a new title had already begun to unfurl. Chapter 9, The Wind Dragon Sips Challenge. Edward sighed. "Wind?" Lucy grinned. "At least it's not more seaweed." Chapter 9, The Wind Dragon Sips Challenge. The wind had been odd all week. It blew sideways in courtyards, upward in hallways, and once completely backward through the breakfast room, which sent several napkins and one unfortunate lemon tart into orbit. By the time the palace weather vanes began spinning against the wind, Edward and Lucy knew what was coming. So did the Book of Dragons. It opened without so much as a creak, just a flutter. A single gust of air turned its pages, despite the windows being closed. Words etched themselves in a whispery script. Chapter 9, The Wind Dragon Sips Challenge. Far above the clouds floats Eris, the city of the sky. It has stood for 1,000 years, held up by harmony. But now the winds fight each other, and the dragon who speaks in riddles has returned to test the world below. If the winds lose balance, the city will fall. Edward closed the book and muttered, "Nothing about this sounds safe." Lucy smiled. "I Sep always wanted to fall upward." The city of Eris. They traveled by skylift, an ancient platform of woven clouds and enchanted feathers tethered to the palace's tallest spire. As they ascended through mist and sunlight, towers began to emerge above the clouds, spindly walkways, bridges suspended on air, and buildings built like wind chimes and flutes. Terrace, the fabled floating city, hovered at the heart of 4 great air currents. Each current had a name: Zephyro, west wind, playful and swift; Norithan, north wind, strong and cold; Salaire, south wind, warm and singing; Varel, east wind, wise and strange. The people of Aris met them on the spiral balcony, their robes floating slightly as if always caught in a breeze. Their leader, a wind reader named Maestra Velin, spoke urgently. "The dragon is awake," she said, "and it is angry. Not because we harmed it, but because we forgot its question, the forgotten question." The wind dragon was not visible, yet it dwelled in the eye, the calm center of the air currents that kept Eris aloft. Long ago, legends said, it had posed a single question to the Sky City. It was answered, but now the answer had been lost. And without the answer, the dragon's breath no longer balanced the winds. Buildings trembled, bridges swayed, the wind screamed nonsense. Maestra Velin pressed a scroll into Edward's hands. This is the oldest fragment of the question. It reads, "Sia what belongs to all, is used by all, but held by none. Sit. Edward frowned. A riddle. Lucy Sip's eyes sparkled. A test. Meeting the wind dragon. To reach the eye, they traveled across a bridge of spun air. Each step vanished behind them, only forming again when they moved forward. In the center of the sky, suspended between currents, floated a vast translucent form, spiraling, always spiraling. The wind dragon. It had no scales, only pressure, no eyes, only spiraling storm. Its voice came like a distant echo through a shell. The answer has been lost. If you cannot find it again, you shall fall with the city. Edward tried to speak, but his words were torn away. Lucy cupped her hands and shouted, "We sat her here to answer." "Then I offer you 3 riddles," the dragon whispered. "Answer 1, and I will wait. Answer 2, and I will rise. Answer all 3, and I will fly with you." The 3 riddles. The wind stilled. The first voice came from Zephyro, breezy and quick. "I fly without wings. I cry without eyes. Wherever I go, darkness flies." "What am I?" Lucy grinned. "The wind, obviously." The breeze fluttered in agreement. One current stabilized. Then came the voice of Varel, slow and wise. "I speak without mouth. I hear without ears. I have no body, but come alive when called." "What am I?" Edward whispered, an echo. The wind circled him, approvingly. The second current steadied. The third voice was quiet, and came from all directions at once. The dragon itself. "What belongs to all, is used by all, but held by none." They stared at each other. Then Lucy said, softly, "It sits, not fire, or thought, or time." Edward closed his eyes, and answered, "Breath." The wind stopped. Then they danced. The gift of flight. The wind dragon rose, its form clearer now, wings of clouds, a body stitched of sky. Its voice rang like wind chimes and thunder. "You have remembered what was forgotten. The breath of life is shared. And so is the sky." It circled the city once, and the currents harmonized. Terrace rose higher, steadier, the danger past. As the dragon faded into clear skies, it left behind a final gust that lifted Edward and Lucy upward, so high for a heartbeat, they flew. Lucy shouted in delight. Edward only clutched his hat. Back on Earth, when they descended, Maestra Velen bowed. "Few passed the Dragon Seps challenge," you answered with heart. The Book of Dragons was already opening when they returned to the palace. Chapter 9, complete. Wind cannot be seen, but it can be known, and the one who learns to listen may learn to fly. At the bottom, another title was forming. Chapter 10, The Dragon Who Wouldn't Sleep. Lucy leaned over. "Oh good, sleep deprivation. That Sips knew." Edward groaned. "We really should have taken that nap in Chapter 4. Chapter 10, The Dragon Who Wouldn't Sleep. Edward didn't remember falling asleep. He only remembered waking up to find his pillow missing, a shoe in the teapot, and the Book of Dragons perched at the foot of his bed, tapping its cover like an impatient librarian. He groaned. "Is it morning already?" Lucy yawned from the doorway. "It was morning 3 hours ago, so it's nearly afternoon now." The book fluttered open on its own and let out a long, exhausted-sounding sigh. Then it wrote, Chapter 10, The Dragon Who Wouldn't Sleep. In the dunes of Lyra, beneath the blistering sun and the endless sky, a dragon wanders. It cannot sleep. It cannot stop. And the world turns strange around it. Where there is no rest, there can be no peace. Lucy blinked. A dragon with insomnia. Edward rubbed his eyes. This better not involve sand in my boots again. The dunes of Lyra. The journey took them across the Mirror Desert, a land so hot and still that even the sand seemed reluctant to move. The dunes of Lyra were legendary. No one who went looking for them ever found the same path twice. Maps changed. Footprints erased themselves. Even shadows wandered off. Edward and Lucy rode on the back of a carafox, a large six-legged creature made of fur and stubbornness, guided by a local sand monk named Serene, who wore 10 scarves and spoke in quiet proverbs. You seek the sleepless one, Serene said, but beware, the dragon does not dream. It spins the world around it. What does that mean? Edward asked. It means, Serene replied, you may walk in circles even through time. Strange signs. They began to notice it by the second day. The sun stopped moving. Their shadows stretched and shrank at random. Once they passed a withered tree in the sand, then passed it again hours later, even though they hadn't turned. And on the third day, Lucy picked up a shiny coin in the sand. A minute later, she picked it up again. Edward looked at it closely. It was a royal coin, from 20 years in the future. That sip's impossible, he whispered. Then came the whisper on the wind. Don't sit, stop. The sleepless one. They found the dragon at sunset, or rather at what would have been sunset if time had remembered how to behave. It was massive, but not in a proud or terrifying way. It dragged itself across the sand in slow, aching loops. Its eyes glowed faintly gold, rimmed with exhaustion. Its wings were tattered and full of sand. It didn't strew raw. It didn't speak. It only moved, endlessly, around and around a cracked stone in the sand. Edward stepped forward, careful not to startle it. Why wanna let you sleep? The dragon turned barely, and in a voice like dry leaves, said, because when I stop, the world changes, and I am not ready. The loop. That night, Edward and Lucy camped at the edge of the dragon's path, or tried to. Time bent. They boiled tea that never cooled. The moon rose, fell, and rose again in minutes. Lucy's socks switched feet when she wasn't looking. The Book of Dragons wouldn't set open. The stars rearranged themselves. Finally, Edward said, this isn't set the dragon sep's fault. Lucy nodded. It sits, afraid. Edward stood and faced the dragon again. You stood trying to hold the world still unset you, he asked. You think if you stop moving, everything will fall apart. The dragon nodded, wearily. I saw too much, lost too many. I thought if I kept going, I could hold it all together. But now, I only carry dust. A new ending. Edward reached into the book. This time it opened only when he stopped trying to write and simply listened. He whispered, it's okay to rest. Dreams aren't sit endings. They stir places where new things begin. The dragon paused. Its head dipped. For the first time in centuries, it closed its eyes. It curled in the sand, sighed once, and fell asleep. Immediately, the desert shifted. The sun resumed its arc. Shadows settled. Time exhaled. And Edward, for the first time in what felt like days, felt tired in a normal way. The sleeping circle. They left the dragon where it lay, in a circle of still sand, now blooming faintly with desert flowers. It wasn't just a dragon, Lucy said softly. It was a clock. And now, Edward said, the world can tick forward again. Back at the palace. The Book of Dragons shimmered with something new. Peace. Chapter 10 concluded. Even dragons must sleep. For without dreams, there can be no stories. And without stories, there can be no dragons. Below it, another title appeared, one that sent a chill down their spines. Chapter 11, The Return of the Last Dragon Sage. Edward sat up straight. That's a person's name. Lucy narrowed her eyes, and I think we met him already. Chapter 11, The Return of the Last Dragon Sage. For once, the Book of Dragons did not open in the middle of the night. It did not burn, weep, whisper, hum, shake, shimmer, or sigh. It simply sat, silent and still, as if holding its breath. Edward stared at it uneasily. Is it sulking? Lucy asked, prodding it with a quill. Before Edward could answer, the cover snapped open, and a single page rose with the sound of parchment exhaling. There were no riddles, no poetry, no cryptic warnings. Just 5 words. He has begun to remember, and then a name formed beneath. Chapter 11, The Return of the Last Dragon Sage. Edward looked at Lucy. I don't like how personal this one sounds. The library no one remembered. They were not sent across deserts or up into the sky. Instead, the book directed them to a place beneath their feet, even deeper than the sub-archives, even below the forgotten folio vaults and the obsolete scrolls dungeon, down where the dust was older than kingdoms, and the shelves no longer held books, but secrets. There, behind a locked steel door marked Authorized Nobody, They found a circular room carved entirely of stone. In the center sat a man, old, still, wrapped in dragon scale robes. His eyes were closed. He breathed slowly. But when Edward and Lucy stepped into the room, he spoke. "You stir late." The last dragon sage. He introduced himself as Serene Markalan, though he had once gone by other names. Many others. He was the last of the dragon scribes, a forgotten order that once wrote the balance between dragons and the world into existence. "I didn't train dragons," he said. "I recorded their truths, their stories, until one day the quill became too heavy." Edward stepped forward. "You wrote the Book of Dragons." The old man opened his eyes. They shimmered, not with age, but with the weight of memory. "No, the book wrote itself. But I taught it how. A fractured history." As Serene spoke, images filled the air, projected from the stone like lantern light woven with dreams. He showed them a time when dragons were not hunted or feared, but understood. When every dragon was linked to a truth: fire, fear, wind, memory, restlessness, greed, imagination. And so long as the stories were told, Serene said, the balance held. But humans began to forget, and dragons began to rage. And I, he whispered, began to erase. One by one, I locked their tales inside the book, not to trap them, but to delay the end. Edward stepped back. "You chose to forget them?" Serene nodded. "But now the book has awoken, and it is writing again, because something is coming that no ink can hold." A broken page. Serene led them to a wall. Embedded in it was a page glowing faintly, but cracked down the middle. "This is the lost chapter," he said. "The one I never finished." The title was broken, the text half erased, but two words still remained. "Dragon King." Lucy leaned closer. "He sips real." Serene looked at them gravely. "The dragons you have met are fragments, emotions, pieces of the world Sip's story. But the Dragon King is the final word." Edward whispered, "What happens when his chapter comes?" "The last story begins." The warning. As they left the hidden library, Serene gave Edward something wrapped in cloth. Inside a single quill carved from a phoenix feather and tipped with dragon bone. "This was mine," Serene said. "It writes not what is, but what must be. Use it only when you can no longer follow the story, only when you must change it." Edward held it like it might explode. "Why me?" he asked. Serene smiled, sadly. "Because you were never meant to read the Book of Dragons, Edward. You were meant to finish it." A heavy page. That night, back at the palace, the Book of Dragons opened of its own accord. No glowing, no drama, just quiet readiness. A new page had formed. Chapter 11, complete. The story waits for no one, but sometimes someone must choose what it becomes. And below, in heavier ink than before, a new chapter title appeared. Chapter 12, The Underground Empire. Lucy stared. "Underground, what now?" Edward sighed. "I was hoping for something above sea level." Chapter 12, The Underground Empire. After meeting Serene Markalan, the last dragon sage, and learning that Edward might one day have to finish the Book of Dragons, everything felt heavier. Even the book itself. It no longer shimmered playfully or fluttered open like an overeager pet. It waited, quiet and deliberate. It was no longer just a book of stories. It was a map, and the next place it wanted to take them was below. One morning, it opened with a deep, resonant thud. Chapter 12, The Underground Empire. Beneath the roots of the mountains and the memories of men, something stirs. The dragons have not simply returned. They have been building. Edward read it aloud, his voice echoing oddly in the room. The shadows seemed longer, the corners darker. Lucy looked over his shoulder. "Great," she said. "We set on sky, sea, ice, fire, dreams and riddles. I suppose it's Sip's time for caves and conspiracies." The descent. They entered the mountains through a fissure marked only by a single ancient carving, a spiral, the symbol for below. The deeper they traveled, the less the air moved. Even the light from their lanterns began to behave strangely, casting shadows behind them before they passed. "Do you hear that?" Edward asked. "I don't hear anything," Lucy said. "Exactly," he whispered. No wind, no echo, no life. Until they heard scratching. Then a low humming. And finally, laughter. The hollow city. At last, the narrow stone path gave way to a vast cavern, and what lay beyond it took their breath away. An entire city had been carved into the underground rock. Not ruins, not rubble, a living empire. Spiral towers of obsidian, bridges made from dragon bone, glowing veins of fire crystal lit the streets like lanterns. And walking among it all were dragons, hundreds of them, smaller than some Edward had seen, but more organized. Some wore armor, others carried scrolls, some seemed to be teaching. The dragons didn't notice the children. Yet, they, sir, civilized, Edward whispered. They, sir, built a world down here. Lucy stared, and no one knows. Not yet, came a voice from behind them. The ambassador. They turned to find a dragon, sleek and silver, wearing a chain of medals and an air of sharp intelligence. I am Valith, it said, ambassador of the Ashen Court. We have been expecting you. Lucy crossed her arms. That sip's never a good sign. Valette smiled with far too many teeth. We do not hide because we are weak, it said. We hide because we are tired of your world, tired of waiting to be hunted, tired of being remembered only in fear. Edward stepped forward. Then why build this? Valith Sep's tail flicked. To survive the final war, the truth beneath. In the heart of the empire, they were shown the Stone of Recollection, a massive orb of petrified magic that hummed with memory. Within it, they saw visions, dragons driven into hiding, hunted for centuries, betrayals, broken pacts, forgotten truces. But then, new memories, dragons building something, not for revenge, but for replacement. We do not wish to rule the surface, Vailith said. We wish to abandon it. The old world is cracked, so we build our own. But you stare waking, Edward said. The book is calling you. Vanithit's gaze sharpened. No, it said. The book is calling the king. A secret plan. Before they could ask what that meant, alarms blared, low guttural horns echoing through the empire. An army of dragons burst into motion, some flying, some running, not toward the humans, toward a gate. A huge obsidian door was glowing with magic and cracking. The seal, Valeth snarled. The king sips tomb. It sips breaking too soon. Lucy paled. What sips behind it? Valeth growled. Not a dragon. Something worse. Something that should have never been written. Escape. In the chaos, Edward and Lucy fled, led by a young copper-scaled dragon named Tira, who disagreed with the warlike elders. You stir not enemies, she hissed as they ran. You stir the last readers. You might be our only chance. They barely escaped through the side tunnels, the sound of cracking stone echoing behind them like thunder in reverse. Back in the light, by the time they returned to the surface, dawn was breaking. But the book had already written the next line. Chapter 12. Closed. They do not sleep. They do not rage. They are building the world they think must come, and it is almost ready. Below, in bolder ink than ever before, a new chapter began. Chapter 13. The sky is falling. Edward sat down hard. Lucy whispered, I think the dragon's arms set the end of the story. Edward closed the book slowly. No, he said, they such just the prologue. Chapter 13. The sky is falling. It began with a star. Not one falling gently across the night sky, like a wish. This one fell with weight, with heat, with a sound like the sky being torn in half. It landed in a distant field with a thunderous crash that lit the night like day and shook the towers of the royal palace all the way to the tip of Edward's toothbrush. The warning. The next morning, the Book of Dragons was already open. No wind, no music, no clever introduction. Just this. Chapter 13. The sky is falling. A dragon of stars has woken. It is not born of earth, fire, or even story. It remembers the universe before stories began, and it has come to end the telling. Beneath the words, a constellation slowly formed, one that did not appear on any known map of the stars. A massive spiral coiled and burning. Lucy stared at it. That's not a dragon, she said. Edward swallowed. It sets a galaxy. The fallen star. They traveled to the crater in the kingdom's outer fields. The earth had split open like a cracked eggshell. At the center was a stone that wasn't stone, smooth, black, impossibly cold. and pulsing with faint light. Standing beside it was a girl, or at least, something shaped like a girl. She was dressed in fragments of sky, her eyes deep with stars, and her skin shimmered like a night sky before thunder. "I am Lithoris," she said. "I am a fragment." Edward looked around. "Of what?" Lithoris pointed upward. "To the one who fell me, the one who rises." Lucy narrowed her eyes. "The sky is breaking open." "No," Lithoris whispered. "The sky is remembering, and that is far worse." The dragon among stars. That night, the stars began to move. Not twinkle, not shoot. Move, sliding, pulsing, realigning like puzzle pieces no one had noticed were shifting. The northern lights burned red. Constellations twisted into shapes of teeth and wings. And then, one star blinked out. Then another, then dozens. Until something larger, so vast it defied the mind, shifted across the night sky like a coiled god stirring in its sleep. A dragon of stars. A being older than flame, before dreams, from the cold spaces between creation. It opened its eyes, and the sky wept meteors. A city in panic. The royal court descended into chaos. Scholars argued, priests cried. One noble fainted directly into a punch bowl. But the book remained calm, and it gave Edward a single line of instruction. Climb. Climb where? Edward wondered. But Lucy already knew. To the tallest place, the highest story, where the world and sky nearly touch. The Tower of Winds. They ascended the eighth spire, the highest tower of the palace, older than the palace itself. It was said to have been built not by stone, but by wind given shape. Up spiral stairs that disappeared behind them, past cold bells and older prayers carved into stone. At the top, there was no roof, only air and stars, and the dragon waiting above. It did not roar. It lowered itself through the sky like a curtain of fire and gravity. Its voice was like comets colliding. "You have built your world on stories. You think your dragons rule meaning, but I was before meaning." Edward stepped forward, terrified. "Then why are you here?" The dragon sip's eyes glowed. "To see if your story is worth continuing." The challenge of the star dragon. It posed a question, not a riddle, not a threat, a challenge. "Tell me a story I do not know. One with an ending even I cannot see." Lucy stepped up first. She told of the invisible dragon, the one born from doubt. The star dragon did not blink. Edward told of the dragon who wouldn't sleep, the dreamless guardian of time. Still, no reaction. Then together, they told a new story. Of a book, of children, of dragons both terrible and tender, of choice. And then Edward added an ending, one he had not spoken aloud before. And in the end, he said, the dragon didn't destroy the world. Because someone listened. Someone wrote a different ending. Not because it was easy, but because they could. There was silence. Then, the star dragon laughed, and the sky rippled with the sound of galaxies breathing. Aftermath, the dragon did not vanish. It folded itself back into the stars, not defeated, satisfied. The sky calmed. The constellations drifted gently back to place. Lithoris, the star fragment, smiled once and vanished in a flicker of starlight. The book responds. Back in the palace, the Book of Dragons wrote without Edward touching it. Chapter 13, complete. Some dragons burn, some sleep, but the greatest dragons ask only one thing. Why should your story go on? And if you answer well, it does. A new chapter began below. Only this time, the title was not whispered. It was etched. It read, Chapter 14, The Fire at the Edge of the World. Lucy looked up. We sut close to the end, Arn, sut we. Edward nodded and said quietly, close to something, yes. Chapter 14, The Fire at the Edge of the World. No one had ever said where the world ended. Most maps simply curled their corners or added illustrations of sea monsters and vague phrases like here be whispers or do not proceed without a very good hat. But the Book of Dragons knew. It opened just after midnight, without any ceremony, just a faint smell of smoke and salt. The page was black at the edges, as if scorched, and the ink glowed faintly red. Chapter 14. The Fire at the Edge of the World. At the end of maps, past the last nameable thing, there burns a ring of fire that never dies. Beyond it lies silence. The dragons do not go there. But one has crossed, and now the fire stirs. Lucy raised an eyebrow. We sit dun sky. We sit dun seer. We sit dun seer. We sit dun seer. Of course now we sit dun seer. We sit dun seer. We sit dun seer. We sit dun seer. The sage of reality itself. Edward said nothing, but deep in his bones, he knew this wasn't just another dragon. This was the threshold. The journey begins. The route was simple. Head west until the world forgets how to describe itself. With the help of the Royal Exploratory Division, which mostly existed for lunch meetings, they took a windship across an ocean with no name, past uncharted islands, and through a fog so thick it whispered their own names back to them. Finally, the sea stopped. Not turned to ice, not land. It just stopped. And beyond that, rising in a perfect circle around the horizon, was the ring of fire. It burned silently, fiercely, a wall of flame that spun like a halo, touching nothing, yet consuming everything near it. I think this is the end, Lucy said. Edward nodded, or the beginning of whatever comes next. The guardian of flame. They couldn't cross the fire, not by ship, not by air. Every attempt failed. Heat repelled them, even before they touched it. Until the fire parted, just slightly. A path opened, only wide enough for two. And on the path stood a figure, not a dragon, a person, or something shaped like one. Tall, clad in black and red robes, eyes ember bright, skin etched with ancient flame sigils. He carried a staff shaped like a quill. I am Ashkar, the gatekeeper, he said. And I know your name's Edward, Lucy. You have been expecting us, Edward said. I have been expecting someone who finished the story instead of reading it, Ashkar replied, but we shall make do. The path of fire. Ashkar led them across the fire path, explaining as they walked. There is not one world, but many, each held together by its own stories, its dragons, its truths. And this ring of fire, Lucy asked. A boundary, the limit of what your world allows. Why is it burning? Edward asked. Ashkar turned, his expression grim. Because something from beyond wants in, and something inside wants out. The rift. At the center of the ring, they found a rift, splitting the ground, wide and jagged, glowing with a terrible red light. It pulsed like a heartbeat. And from within, something whispered. A voice not meant for ears, not words, not sound. Emotion. Grief, rage, longing, power. It was instead a dragon. It was a story that had been unwritten. Ashkar stood at the edge. Centuries ago, a dragon went too far. It tried to unmake its own tale, to become more than fire, wind, time, or memory. It wanted to begin again. And it tore a hole in the world, Edward whispered. Ashkar nodded. And now, it wants to come back. A choice of flame. The Book of Dragons burned in Edward's hands, but did not turn to ash. Instead, it opened to a page that was completely blank, save for a single line. Write the gate closed, or let it open. But choose. Lucy stepped forward. We don't know what sipped on the other side. Ashkar shook his head. You never do. That sips the danger and the beauty of what comes next. Edward stared at the rift, at the flames, at the book, and he asked the question that had been building in his heart for chapters now. Who started this story? Ashkar looked at him, quietly. You did. The page is written. Edward took the quill Serene had given him, the one that wrote not what was but what must be. He dipped it into the flame, and wrote, The fire burns to warn, but also to light the path. The gate remains watched. But for now, the story continues. The flames quieted, the rift sealed, not destroyed, not forgotten, only postponed. For now, return. When Edward and Lucy stepped back onto the ship, the sea was calm, the sky clear. The Book of Dragons waited in Edward's hands, its warmth no longer threatening. It opened one last time that night. Chapter 14, complete. The edge is not the end. It is the choice, to burn it down, or to build beyond it. And then for the first time in the entire book, a new title shimmered into view that neither of them could read at first. Then it resolved. And read, Chapter 15, The Great Dragon Council. Lucy leaned her head back and exhaled. Finally, a meeting. Edward cracked a grin. Let's hope it doesn't set end in fireworks. Chapter 15, The Great Dragon Council. The sky turned violet the morning the dragons came. Not because of magic, though there was plenty of that, but because something about the world itself was tilting. It was the day the sky grew heavy with wings. The summoning. The Book of Dragons did not open that morning. Instead, it glowed. A golden seal, pulsing faintly, hovered above the cover like a crown made of breath and heat. When Edward touched it, the page turned without paper. No ink, just voice. Chapter 15, The Great Dragon Council. When the dragons once ruled, they ruled not by flame, but by accord. Now they must gather again, to decide if the world will continue, or begin again in ash. Lucy read over his shoulder. Sounds like a debate with fangs. Edward looked up. We searched not invited to a council. We searched being summoned. The sky platform. That evening, a massive disc made of wind and stone descended from the sky, circling slowly above the palace gardens. Dragons landed upon it from every corner of the world, each one familiar. The ice dragon, its breath trailing snowflakes that never melted. The fire-hearted mountain dragon, now glowing calmly with inner warmth. The sea serpent, coiled in mist. The dreamless dragon, awake but silent. The invisible one, visible only through its rippling effect on air. Even the wind dragon, impossible to look at directly, spiraled overhead like a thought half-finished. And in the center of the platform stood a dais made of pearl, obsidian and sand. The Council of Scale and Flame had begun. The opening decree. A dragon neither Edward nor Lucy had seen before, stepped forward. It was neither large nor flashy, but old, ancient. Its eyes burned with patient wisdom. I am Solgraith, it said, dragon of balance, keeper of the accord. Its voice echoed through the platform and across the sky. For centuries we have waited, we have endured, we have burned and been buried, but the world turns again, and the book writes new names. It turned its gaze toward Edward. And now, a reader has become a writer. Edward flushed. Lucy cleared her throat. Let the record show he since only accidentally let out half the magical population of this realm. The debate begins. Each dragon spoke. Some were calm, some were furious, some wept molten tears. The ice dragon, the world has forgotten how to slow down. It must be frozen again, stopped before it burns itself out. The fire dragon, let it burn bright, let the old world pass into smoke. From flame, the new can rise. The sea serpent, it must remember its promises, or drown. The wind dragon, it listens, but does not hear, end it. The dreamless one, the world cannot sleep, it dreams wrong. Lucy stood. You can sit, just vote the world away. Solgraith tilted its head. Can you offer a better choice? Edward stepped forward. I can, he said, but not alone. A voice for the world. Edward turned, and to Lucy's surprise, unrolled a scroll. One he sept written himself. It wasn't long, it wasn't poetic, but it was honest. The world has hurt you, forgotten you, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth saving. We have seen what happens when dragons rage, and what happens when dragons listen. What if this time we did both? What if we didn't burn the book, but wrote a new chapter together? A split decision. The council murmured, wings beat slowly, tails curled. And then, 2 dragons voted for ending the world's story. 3 voted to protect it. 1 abstained, silent, still, unreadable. The vote was tied, until Solgraith spoke. There is one more vote. Lucy blinked. Whose? Solgraith turned its eyes on her. Yours. Lucy Sepp's choice. Lucy stepped into the circle. She looked at the dragons, the platform, the sky, and then at Edward, and she said, I vote to continue the story, because endings are easy, but hope, that takes work. The accord. Solgraith raised its wings. So it shall be. Light burst from the dais. Dragons lifted their heads in unison. And above them all, the Book of Dragons turned a page on its own. Chapter 15 concluded. Not every story ends in fire. Some end in choice. And this one has not ended yet. At the bottom of the page, a new title formed. But this time, it burned brighter than any before. Chapter 16, The War of Flames and Ice. Edward Sepp's face fell. Lucy sighed. Well, that lasted 10 minutes. Chapter 16, The War of Flames and Ice. Peace, it turns out, is as fragile as frost on a sunlit leaf. Only hours had passed since the Great Dragon Council, when the vote was cast to continue the world's story. And yet the Book of Dragons began to smoke again, this time not with warmth, but with warning. It opened itself just after dusk. The air turned brittle as it did, and the page glowed red on one side, blue on the other. Chapter 16, The War of Flames and Ice. The choice was made, but not all dragons agree. Fire has risen, ice has awakened. And between them lies the world. Edward read the page twice. Lucy was already pulling on her boots. Let me guess. We sit not spectators. Sides drawn. The first signs came quickly. The fire dragon of the mountain, once soothed by Edward's story, erupted again, its volcano rumbling with anger, not at the world but at the vote. You would chain us again, it roared. You would ask fire to sleep while ice freezes the future. And from the north, the ice dragon, cold and enormous, responded with an avalanche that buried a valley town in silence. Burning the future is no better than freezing it. Let the world still, let it pause. Dragons chose sides. Some sought renewal through fire. Others sought control through stillness. Few remembered peace, a world in collapse. Forests caught fire beneath red-winged dragons. Mountains cracked with freezing winds. Villages fled. Storms clashed in the sky. A rain of ash fell on the coast, while frost coated the desert dunes. And the Book of Dragons began to crack. Not completely, but like a spine under too much weight. Edward clutched it. If this continues, the book itself will break. Lucy stared out a frost-covered window, and then we lose all the stories. A plan of desperation. They gathered their allies. Tira, the copper dragon from the underground empire who refused to choose sides. Lithoris, the fallen star fragment, returned in a cloak of celestial dust. Serene Markalan, the dragon sage, old and weary but ready. And they flew, not to a battlefield, but to a place that had been neutral in every age. The Mirror Valley, a hidden place where the sky and earth reflected each other perfectly. If fire and ice meet here, Edward said, they see themselves, not just each other. And if they refuse, Lucy asked. Then we write the last chapter, Serene said, before the book finishes itself. The clash. The dragons arrived at dawn. Fire on one side, glowing with fury. Ice on the other, gleaming with resolve. No words, no truce, just a tension so sharp it cut the clouds. Then fire breathed first. A column of heat that scorched the valley floor. Ice answered with a roar of sleet and shard. The air screamed. Holding the line, Edward ran forward, alone. He held up the Book of Dragons, even as it trembled in his hands. Stop. The flames curved toward him. So did the frost. But before either could strike, the book opened itself. Pages turned faster than sight. And from them, every dragon they had met appeared. The sea serpent, coiling in mist. The wind dragon, circling overhead. The dreamless one, silent but vast. The story hoarder, wings made of tails. They landed between fire and ice, not to fight. To remind, you are parts, they said together, not ends. Fire is not rage. Ice is not erasure. The world holds both, so must you. Peace through memory. The ice dragon blinked, slowly. The fire dragon lowered its wings, and together they touched the bookcep's open page. A new word formed, balance. A breeze stirred the valley. The frost receded, the flames cooled, and the dragons, fire, ice, wind, sea, dream, story, breathed together. Not as rulers, as keepers. The book rewritten. Back in the palace, the Book of Dragons lay still. Then it shimmered. Chapter 16. resolved. There is no one way forward. No one dragon, no one truth. But together, fire and frost form the storm, and stories carry weather. Beneath it, a new title burned gently into place. Chapter 17, the last page of the book. Edward sat very still. Lucy didn't speak. Until she whispered, "This is it, isn't it?" Edward nodded. The next chapter ends it all. Chapter 17, the last page of the book. It happened without thunder, without flame or fanfare, just a stillness. A hush, like the world had drawn in its breath and then forgotten how to exhale. Edward and Lucy sat in the Royal Library. They had just returned from Mirror Valley, the memory of flame and frost still lingering on their skin like warmth after a fever. The Book of Dragons sat on its pedestal. It did not glow. It did not hum. It simply waited. Then, without opening, it spoke. "Come alone." The book opens. When Edward approached, the cover opened itself, slowly, as though it was tired. The pages turned, one after another, flipping through memories. The lion from the first story, the ice-bound princess, the invisible dragon, the sea serpent, the sky dragon, the dragon who wouldn't sleep, the fire and the frost. All flickered past like dreams, until at last a blank page settled into view. Then one word wrote itself in ink that shimmered like starlight. Chapter 17, the last page of the book. Edward reached for the quill Serene had given him, but he couldn't move his hand. Not yet. The book wrote more. Every story ends, and this one has come to its last page. You may write it, or leave it blank, but what you choose will echo. The choice. Lucy stood behind him now, silent. The book offered no instructions, no threats, just space. "Do we write the end?" Edward asked her. Lucy looked at the page, at the ink, at the world held together by dragons, memories, and stories. And she said quietly, "Maybe it sits not about ending the book, maybe it sits about letting it go." Edward frowned. "You mean, do not write the last chapter at all?" She nodded. "Every story we've entered, every dragon we met, they weren't just tales. They were parts of us, parts of everyone. And maybe stories don't die unless we try to finish them." The book remembers. The room darkened, not from fear, from depth. The pages of the book flipped again, but this time upward, as if the stories were not ending, but returning to the sky, to the sea, to the wind. And on the final page, new words began to appear, not written by Edward, not by the book, but by every voice it had ever held. This is not the last page. This is the next one. As long as someone listens, the book will never close. Edward dropped the quill. The book shimmered and then quietly closed. One last line. The gold dragon scale cover bore a single line now, engraved not in words, but in meaning. Lucy smiled. Edward exhaled. He didn't speak, but when he reached forward and touched the spine, a final phrase whispered itself into the air. To be continued. The final chapter forms. That night, the book glowed gently, no longer humming with power, but peace. A single title etched itself on the very last page, Chapter 18, The New Age. And below it, the simplest instruction either of them had ever seen. Begin. Chapter 18, The New Age. Morning came softly. No omens, no warnings, just golden sunlight spilling through the palace windows, as if the sky had remembered how to breathe. There were no dragons in the sky, no trembling in the earth, only birdsong, only stillness, only peace. Edward and Lucy stood by the pedestal where the Book of Dragons rested, now closed, not locked, not sealed, just quiet. It hadn't spoken since the night before, but it had left one final page, the last chapter. Edward opened it carefully. This time, there was no flicker of magic. No music in the air, just paper, parchment soft and real. Words were already waiting. Chapter 18, The New Age. Not an ending, not even a beginning. A choice, a turning of the page. The dragons have returned to the skies, the seas, the wind, the deep. And now, the world belongs to its storytellers. Lucy touched the margin. The ink didn't move. "Does this mean it's said?" she asked. Edward looked down. "No," he said. "It means it's sex ours now." Changes in the world. Over the coming days, weeks, and months, the world began to shift, but not in the way people expected. Dragons didn't straight reign. They didn't set vanish either. They wandered, quietly, sometimes glimpsed at dawn over mountain peaks, or coiled around ocean fog banks, or sleeping beneath tree roots. People didn't spare them, they wrote about them. And because of that, stories flourished. Not just about dragons, but about everything. A girl who found a ship inside a mirror, a village that sang back the wind, a boy who planted stories like seeds and grew forests from them. And somewhere, far beneath the palace, the Book of Dragons sat, its cover no longer glowing. Because it was now part of the world, not outside it. The storytellers. Edward and Lucy grew up. Not too quickly, not perfectly, but they grew. And they remembered. They became many things. Readers, writers, rulers, eventually. But most importantly, they became story keepers. They didn't tell people what to believe. They listened. They helped others tell their stories too. And when people asked, "Did that really happen? Did you really meet dragons?" they would smile and say, "You sir, holding the book, ani you." The final page. Years later, perhaps many, perhaps few, someone will find the book again. Maybe it will hum, maybe it will stay quiet. But on the last page, they still see one line, asterisk. Asterisk. There is no last page. Only the next reader. Asterisk. Asterisk. And maybe, just maybe, someone like you will read it and write the next chapter. The end. Thanks for spending this quiet time with me here at Sweet Dreams Storytelling. I hope you're feeling relaxed, peaceful, and ready for a restful sleep. As we say goodnight, let the calm background music guide you gently into dreamland. Before you go, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. And until next time, rest well.